The worst day of my life was not the day I broke my hip at 90 years old. It was not the day I woke up in a hospital bed unable to remember how I had gotten there. It was the day a doctor looked at me for less than 10 seconds and made me realize I had been absent from my own son's life for nearly 50 years. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? A man can live in the same house, sit at the same dinner table, pay every bill on time, and still miss the most important moments in his child's life. I know because I did exactly that. Before this story ends, I want to tell you how a single forgotten moment became a lifetime of regret, why my son stopped sharing the most important parts of his life with me, and what one doctor said in a hospital room that changed the way I understood fatherhood forever. I am 90 years old now. My hands shake when I button my shirt. I need a notebook to remember appointments. But there are details from 40 years ago that remain painfully clear. I remember the blue jacket my son wore when he was 8. I remember the smell of rain on the afternoon I disappointed him without even realizing it. I remember the exact expression on his face the first time he stopped expecting me to show up. At the time, I thought I was being responsible. I worked long hours. I believed providing for my family was the highest form of love. Every missed school event, every postponed conversation, every promise moved to next week felt justified. I told myself I was sacrificing for my son. What I didn't understand was that children don't measure love in sacrifices they cannot see. They measure it in moments. And I missed the one moment that mattered most. Tell me to continue. The moment I missed seemed small at first. That is the cruel thing about certain mistakes. They do not arrive with warning signs. No sirens. No dramatic music. No voice telling you that what happens in the next hour will follow you for the rest of your life. My son was 10 years old. It was a Thursday in May of 1976. He had spent weeks preparing for a school ceremony. Nothing extraordinary by adult standards, just a small event in a crowded gymnasium with folding chairs and nervous children holding pieces of paper. But to him, it was everything. For 3 weeks he talked about it during breakfast. For 3 weeks he practiced reading his speech at the kitchen table. For 3 weeks he asked me the same question. Dad, you're coming, right? And every time I gave the same answer. Of course I am. I meant it when I said it. That is what makes it worse. The ceremony started at 6 o'clock. At 5:15, I was still at work. At 5:30, I was in a meeting that should have ended. At 5:45, I looked at my watch and convinced myself there was still time. At 5:50, someone brought in another problem that needed solving. At 6 o'clock, my son walked onto a stage and searched the crowd. I was not there. Years later, my wife told me what happened. She said he looked toward the entrance 3 separate times while holding his paper. The first time, he smiled. The second time, he looked worried. The third time, he stopped looking. That detail still hurts more than I can explain. He stopped looking. By the time I arrived, the folding chairs were being stacked against the wall. Parents were taking photographs. Children were running across the gym floor with certificates in their hands. My son stood beside my wife. He was holding an award. I had never seen him so quiet. I'm sorry, I told him. He nodded. That's okay. Children often say that's okay when it is absolutely not okay. On the drive home, he sat in the back seat staring out the window. The certificate rested on his lap. I remember trying to make conversation. I remember talking too much. I remember him answering with one-word replies. And I remember thinking everything would be fine tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. The years moved quickly after that. I attended some events and missed others. I was present enough to call myself a good father. Absent enough that my son slowly stopped expecting me. The change happened so gradually I barely noticed it. When he was 12, he invited me to things. When he was 15, he informed me about them. When he was 18, he stopped mentioning them altogether. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Inside, something important had gone missing. And I was the last person to understand it. Then, 80 years into my life, a hospital room forced me to see what I had spent decades avoiding. Tell me to continue. The years after that ceremony passed the way most regrets begin quietly. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting matches. No slammed doors. No moment where my son looked me in the eye and told me I had failed him. Instead, life continued. And that was the problem. In 1983, when he was 17, he won a regional science competition. My wife told me about it over dinner at 7:20 in the evening. I congratulated him. He thanked me. Then he went upstairs. Only later did I learn he had spent 2 months preparing for it. Only later did I learn there had been an awards ceremony. Only later did I realize he had never invited me. Not because he forgot. Because he assumed I would be busy. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night feeling strangely relieved. No conflict. No disappointment. No difficult choices. I mistook the absence of expectations for peace. I was wrong. 3 years later, in 1986, he graduated from university. I attended. I sat in the audience. I applauded. I even took photographs. Looking back at those pictures now, I notice something I missed then. Every photograph shows us standing side by side. Not one shows us looking at each other. At the celebration afterward, he spent most of his time talking with friends, professors, and relatives. I told myself he was independent. I told myself I had raised a strong young man. What I never asked was why he no longer came to me first with important news. Then came 1994. The year he became a father. My first grandson was born at 3:14 in the morning. I found out at noon. Not because my son forgot to call. Because he called his mother first. Then his friends. Then his brother-in-law. Then me. I laughed when he told me. I pretended it didn't matter. But after we hung up, I sat alone in my office and stared at the phone for nearly 20 minutes. Something felt wrong. Something felt distant. Yet I still refused to examine it. The truth was standing directly in front of me. I simply didn't want to see it. The years continued. Birthdays. Graduations. Family dinners. Christmas mornings. I attended many of them. But attendance is not the same thing as presence. That distinction would not become clear until I was 90. By then my wife was gone. The house was quieter. The stairs hurt my knees. The mirror showed a stranger wearing my face. And then one icy morning, I slipped in the driveway. The fall itself lasted less than 3 seconds. The consequences changed everything. I woke up in a hospital bed under fluorescent lights, listening to machines breathe around me. My son arrived 2 hours later. Older now. Gray-haired. Tired looking. Kind. Far kinder than I deserved. And that was when the doctor walked into the room. The doctor looked at my chart. Then at my son. then at me. And he asked a question so simple that it shattered 40 years of excuses. Tell me to continue. The hospital room was cold. Not painfully cold. Just enough to make everything feel less human. A machine beside my bed released a soft beep every few seconds. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Outside the small window, January snow drifted past in slow silence. My son sat in a chair near the wall. Not close to my bed. Not far away either. Just close enough to help if I needed something. That distance said more than words ever could. He had arrived as soon as he heard about the accident. The nurse told me he had driven nearly 3 hours through bad weather to get there. 3 hours. I remembered missing his ceremony because I didn't want to leave work 30 minutes early. The thought stayed with me. Then the doctor entered. He reviewed a chart, asked a few routine questions, and checked my vitals. Nothing unusual. Then he turned toward my son. Has your father always had trouble remembering important dates? He asked. My son smiled politely. The kind of smile people use when they don't want to embarrass someone. Then he said quietly, only the ones that mattered to me. The room became very still. I don't think the doctor understood what he had just heard. But I did. Every birthday party I arrived late to. Every game I promised to attend. Every school event. Every conversation postponed. Every next time. They all returned at once. My son wasn't angry. That was the worst part. Anger would have been easier. Anger means someone is still fighting for something. What sat across from me was acceptance. A man who had learned long ago not to expect too much from his father. The doctor continued talking. I never heard another word. I was staring at my son's hands. They looked older than I remembered. Strong hands. Working hands. Hands I had barely noticed becoming a man's hands because I had been too busy looking elsewhere. Finally I spoke. Is that true? I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. My son looked at me. For a moment, I saw the 10-year-old boy standing in that school gym searching the crowd. Then he answered. Yes, Dad. Nothing more. Just 2 words. No accusation. No lecture. No anger. Only truth. And somehow truth hurt more than any punishment ever could. I felt tears gathering before I could stop them. 90 years old. And for the first time in decades, I had no excuse left to hide behind. The doctor quietly left the room. Neither of us noticed. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then my son stood up, walked to my bedside, and adjusted the blanket that had slipped from my shoulder. Such a small gesture. Such an enormous act of kindness. I looked at him and realized something devastating. He had become the father in the room. And I had spent half a century arriving too late. One tear landed on the hospital blanket. Then another. And for the first time in 40 years, I stopped defending myself. Tell me to continue. I used to think fatherhood was something you did like paying bills, fixing things, showing up when it was convenient. I thought presence was enough if the house stayed running and the child never went hungry. In that hospital bed, I learned a different name for it. Neglect can look like responsibility when it is spread across enough years. After the doctor left, I finally asked my son something I should have asked decades earlier. Are you angry with me? He didn't answer immediately. He sat back down, rubbed his thumb over the edge of his sleeve, and looked at the floor as if the answer was somewhere down there. Then he said something I still carry like a weight I cannot put down. No, I stopped being angry a long time ago. A pause. I just stopped expecting. That word stopped stayed in the air longer than any medical machine sound in that room. I wanted to tell him I didn't know. That I thought I had time. That I believed being there sometimes was enough. But all of those sentences felt like excuses dressed as language. So I said nothing. Instead, I reached for one simple truth I could finally admit. I missed you growing up, I said. He nodded. I know. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just understanding. And somehow that was heavier than both. That was the moment I understood something I had never named before. I called it providing. But it was actually absence with structure. I called it being busy. But it was really choosing distance over discomfort. I called it tomorrow, but it was a way of avoiding today. And my son had grown up inside all of those renamed things. Now I want to speak to you directly. Because I know what you might think. You might think this is just a story about an old man in a hospital bed. It is not. It is a story about the moments you postpone because they feel small. The calls you don't return because you are tired. The events you skip because you assume there will be another. There is always a reason. That is what makes it dangerous. If you are telling yourself right now that you will fix it later, that you will show up next time, that they already know you care, you are speaking the same language I used for 50 years. And I promise you, it does not protect anything. It only delays the moment you realize it no longer matters. So I ask you not as advice, but as something I wish someone had forced me to answer, who in your life has stopped expecting you, but still remembers what it felt like when they did. When I left that hospital days later, my son helped me into the car. He didn't say I forgive you. He didn't say I don't. He just closed the door carefully, like I was something fragile now. And I realized something else. Forgiveness is not always spoken. Sometimes it is just the absence of further damage. Tell me to continue. The day I came back home from the hospital, I stood in front of my own door longer than I should have. Not because I didn't recognize it, but because it didn't recognize me. The paint was the same. The handle was the same. The small crack near the frame was still there from when my son once kicked the door too hard running inside as a child. I remember thinking he is the only one who ever made this house feel alive. Inside, everything was exactly as I left it before the fall. Too exactly. That was the problem. Nothing had changed enough to prove I had been present in any meaningful way. On the kitchen table, there was an old photo of him at 10 years old. The one from the school ceremony I missed. Someone had placed it there years ago and never moved it. I sat down across from it. For a long time, I just looked at his face. That boy. Still waiting for someone in the crowd who never came. I reached out and touched the edge of the frame. And I finally said the words that no machine, no doctor, no lifetime of silence had been able to force out of me. I was there, I whispered. Just not when it mattered. The house did not answer. It never did. Later that evening, my son called. Not about anything important. Just to ask if I had eaten. A simple question. The kind I used to think didn't carry weight. Before I answered, I looked at the phone for a long time. Not in fear. In understanding. Because now I knew what it could take. A second too late. A moment too long. A lifetime of next time. I picked it up. And I listened. Not because I needed to say anything profound. But because I finally understood what presence actually is. It is not big. It is not dramatic, it is just answering while the call is still alive. The phone didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something I had finally learned how to hold correctly. And for the first time in many years, I didn't miss the moment. I was inside it.